Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paridana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamsha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunivari Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, welcome to our continued study of this most wonderful Bhagavad Gita. So today we'll be discussing 5 verses from chapter 12, starting from verse number 8, and we'll go until verse number 12. So, just a few verses today. So, Arjuna is being instructed, and we have this interesting dynamic that why Arjuna should fight if Krishna just wants him to fix his mind upon him, to meditate upon him. And that is, the only reason is because Krishna wants him to. That is the topmost reason why Arjuna should fight, and that is bhakti. Do whatever Krishna wants. And so in this 8th verse, Krishna is explaining the highest platform of devotional service. And so this verse reads, just fix your mind upon me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and engage all your intelligence in me. Thus you will live in me always, without a doubt. So Krishna is explaining the highest bar, the highest position, which is to one who can fix their mind upon Krishna as the Supreme Lord, not the impersonal form or the Vishvarupa form, but in this direct relationship with the all-attractive, beautiful form, and engage all, not some of their intelligence, but all of their intelligence in Krishna. And we see that this is with great attachment. So there will be great affection in this experience. And so this is the highest perfected stage of bhakti. Full attachment, full of love. We know this attachment, it comes as ashakti. And the 9 steps from Krishna to Prema. So it's very high after Anartha Nivritti, after Nishta, after Ruchi, the taste of the holy names. Then comes the Shakti. So this is just before Bhava Bhakti. But this attachment is very intense in this stage. It's almost addicting. It's so sweet. So this is the um, the high platform that Krishna is explaining here with full attachment and love. Ultimately, that is the perfection of bhakti. When one is awakened, their love for Krishna. We'll speak more about that in the next verse. So Krishna says that thus you will live in me always, without a doubt. So Prabhupada explains in the purport that when we think of Krishna, we are with him. He is non-different from his names. When we chant his names, we are associating with Krishna. Thus it means we are with him, living with him, always, in any situation. Prabhupada says when we chant the Mahamantra, Krishna and Radharani are dancing on our tongue. They're actually dancing on our tongue. Now imagine if we actually saw this. This is reality. But if we are able to see this, would there be any difficulty to concentrate our mind on Krishna? And if we saw this, would we ever stop chanting? Just so we could see this beautiful form dancing on our tongue. Right? When we offer bhoga to Krishna, he is personally coming to our home for dinner. Imagine if we actually understood that. When we make the offering and we put her, Krishna is coming home for dinner, personally. When we read these verses from Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is directly speaking to us, one-to-one. So this is the reality, because Krishna is non-different from his words, from his pictures, from his deity forms, from his form, his pastimes, qualities. He's non-different. But in our conditioned state, we perceive differences. But in a purified state, there's no perceived difference. One actually experiences Krishna in this way. And thus, the mind is constantly fixed on the form of Krishna. It is constantly there. So, this highest stage of bhakti is being explained by Krishna after he has explained the different, the differences between the personal and impersonal worship of Krishna. Now he is elevating and explaining the highest platform of devotional service. So let us see now what, in the 9th verse, how Krishna is explaining, what if we can't come to this highest stage, constantly fixing the mind on Krishna? What to do? So Krishna says, my dear Arjuna, O winner of wealth, if you cannot fix your mind upon me without deviation, then follow the regular principles of Bhakti Yoga. In this way, develop a desire to attain me. So if you can't fix your mind upon Krishna without deviation, then the recommendation, follow the regular principles of bhakti. So in the prior verse, Krishna is speaking about the perfected stage of devotional service, where one has this deep attachment. The desire to serve is an internal, spontaneous attraction. One is chanting their japa not because they took a vow, but because they have great bliss in chanting. One is rendering service not out of following the orders of guru or sadhu or shastra, but because there is great spontaneous attachment. But what if we have not reached that stage then? Krishna says, no problem. Do basically Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Follow the regulative principles of bhakti. Right? Which Prabhupada explains, this is the cleansing process by which one can reach the perfected stage. This is the practice to purify and be able to progress towards the perfected stage. And we see in Nectar of Devotion several verses to explain this to us. Rupa Goswami quotes the verse Sarvo Parivinirmiktam Tatpade Vinanirmalam Rishikesha Rishikena Sevanam Bhakti Uchite. That when one performs devotional service, there are two side effects. And one of them is his senses become purified. The other is they become free from all material designations or difficulties. But the senses being purified, this is what we want to do. We don't know what to love. We keep trying to love so many things. Our movies, sports, different social things. But when the senses become purified, Prabhupada writes, they can come in direct contact with Krishna. So we must elevate to this pure stage of love. And of course, love is expressed by service. Our service in the material world is not out of love. Prabhupada writes, when we serve the boss or the master, we do it for some money, something in return. That's the only reason we do it. We're not serving out of love. But when the senses become purified of all the material hankerings, then our devotional service to Krishna becomes the deepest expression of love. And Prabhupada further comments, where is this love situated? We know, Kriti Sadhya, Bhavat Sadhya, Bhavana Sadhana, Bhavana Sadhana, Nidisasya, Prakritam Riddhi Sadyate. That this love is lying dormant in everyone's heart. And the practice of sadhana bhakti is the process to awaken this dormant love that is lying within all of us. That is the potency, the end result of this bhakti. This nitya siddhasya, right? It is always there. And so, to awaken this love, one must do sadhana bhakti. And what is the regular principles being discussed here? Those are 64 angas of devotional service. So, Rupa Goswami has explained 64 different practices of devotional service. And Prabhupada quotes some of them: rising early, chanting rounds, entering the temple, offering prayers, so many, reading Srimad Bhagavatam, right? These are the different angas of devotional service. So by practicing those, one will awaken this pure love that was explained in verse 8, by the purification of the senses, purification of the heart. Now, Prabhupada makes an important point that the key is that we must do this under guidance. And that's why the first 5 angas of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti speak about accepting and approaching and inquiring and surrendering to Guru, the spiritual master. So one learns how to perform this practice by the mercy of the spiritual master. Right? So Prabhupada writes that to practice the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga, one should, under the guidance of an expert spiritual master, follow certain principles. So he says again, the practice of Bhakti Yoga under the rules and regulations with the direction of spiritual master will surely bring one to the stage of love of God. So this is the process. And the principal understanding in practicing our Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, always remember Krishna and never forget him. Smarta bhavya satatam Vishnu Vishmarta bhavya najata sarve vide nishedyoshur etayoreva kinkara. That everything we do in Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti should be centered around this single goal. Always remember Krishna and never forget him. So this is the regular process of devotional service that Krishna is explaining here. If one has not yet been able to reach the perfected stage, which is full absorption in Krishna with attachment and love. So now what to do if we cannot do that? So Krishna says, okay, no problem. If you cannot practice, this is verse 10, the regular principles of bhakti, then just work for me, because by working for me, you will come to the perfect stage. So the prior two verses are speaking about engaging the mind in thinking of Krishna, which is not always so easy due to the uncontrolled senses. Right? So if we can't even do Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, chanting our 16 rounds, taking initiation, accepting a guru, attending Srimad Bhagavatam class, if we cannot do that, then at least one should work with their physical senses for Krishna. If the mind is too flickering and uncontrollable, then work for Krishna. Surrender the fruits. Maybe even not directly to Krishna, but work for Krishna. So this is basically Nishkam Karma Yoga. And what is the result of this? One will purify and progress towards pure devotional service. Remember, Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti is within the realm of pure bhakti. Right? No other material desires. So though it is the beginning stage of bhakti, of pure bhakti, it is within pure devotional service. So it's quite a high stage. But by working for Krishna, one will purify and thus be able to come to that platform. So if we can't follow all the principles of bhakti, then still one can come to the perfected stage by doing some work for Krishna. And what kind of work is this? Prabhupada writes, using some money to build temples, to print books, using their physical labor to help, serve in some way, help support the organization, the local community, do something to help with some sort of active engagement of the physical senses. Right? So these people are not sinful people breaking the regulator principles, the four regs, but they're very pious people who have a inclination, but not yet come fully to committing to pure bhakti. Right? So, and again, the result of this, by engaging the external senses, which is easier than engaging the internal senses like the mind, it's easier to engage, I can do some work for Krishna. That allows us to purify, right? So I can do some, physical service, give some donations, something of that matter, and that will help elevate one slowly to pure devotional service. And Prabhupada writes that if one has sufficient money, he can build an office or a temple for propagating Krishna consciousness. And a couple lines later, if one cannot sacrifice the results of his activities, then the same person can still sacrifice some percentage. So he's describing here Nishkam Karma Yoga, where one is surrendering all the fruits. They have no other desires. But below that, or just prior to that, is Sakam Karma Yoga, where one still has some desire, but they're renouncing, and so some portion they're renouncing. Right? So this is the stage. If one cannot practice the regulative principles of bhakti, or if one cannot practice full absorption in devotional service. Well, what to do if we cannot do this even? Are we stuck? No. Krishna gives another option. He says in 11, if, however, you are unable to work in this consciousness of me, then try to act, giving up all the results of your work, and try to be self-situated. So Krishna says, well, if you cannot work in direct consciousness of Krishna due to some impediment, by helping to build a temple or print some books or render volunteer service for some festival, then at least sacrifice the results of your work to some pious endeavor, some good cause. Now this sacrifice is not to Krishna, but it is to some good cause. This is basically karma kanda. And what we note here, in each of the prior verses, Krishna has stated a result from that activity. In 8, he says, by fixing your mind, what will happen? You will live with me always. So that was the result of 8. In 9, Krishna says, the result of practicing regular principles, he said, in this way you'll develop a desire to attain me. So a desire to live with Krishna will result from practicing the regular principles. In 10, Krishna said, by doing this karma yoga, you'll come to the perfect stage. So in each of those verses, he is given a result. But in this verse, we note that no result is stated. Why? Because giving up the fruits is not a spiritual activity within the realm of spiritual realm until one is surrendering it to the Supreme. So to give some charity, that is not a spiritual activity, that is a material activity. There'll be some temporary benefit, but it'll be material. So it's now real, tangible advancement. Ultimately, it leads to more bondage and surrender. But hopefully, the hope is that by this indirect worship, one will learn the process of detaching from the fruits of their labor and slowly elevate to the point of surrendering to Krishna. So while it is not a spiritual activity, while it creates and leads to bondage and more cycle of birth and death, at least it has the hope of slowly elevating one to these higher realms Krishna has just spoken. But it is very uncertain if it will or not, because one may become absorbed in the results of that good activity materially and thus lose their focus for further purification. So it's not a very recommended path. And Krishna, Prabhupada will speak about that a little bit more in the purport to the next verse. So this is indirect worship, whereas in verses 8 through 10, there is some direct relationship to Krishna. But this is indirect. And that's why we see, this karma yoga, and up is within the yoga ladder of attempting to link with Krishna. But karma kanda is not on the yoga ladder because the goal, the objective, is not transcendental, it is material. So just a reminder from way back from chapters 3 through 6. So, and why does this happen? Prabhupada writes, sometimes there's an impediment. There's some obstacle to rendering direct service. Maybe it's family, maybe it's, some friends, some objections that come, and so one is not able to render this type of service. So now we get to the final verse of this section. Krishna says, but if you cannot, he says, if you cannot take to this practice, then engage yourself in the cultivation of knowledge. Better than knowledge, however, is meditation, and better than meditation is renunciation of the fruits of action. For by such renunciation, one can attain peace of mind. So, this verse is known to be, one of the more confusing, or most confusing verses in Bhagavad Gita. Borijan Prabhu in Surrender to Me has given much explanation here, as well as written an appendix on this verse, because it is not so clear, but we'll follow what has been explained as best we can. So here it says, if you cannot take to this practice, and this is referring back to verse 10 of this karma yoga. Not the karma kanda from 12:11, but karma yoga from 12:10. So there's these progressive stages of service. So if you cannot do karma yoga, then it is better to cultivate knowledge, gyan, knowing the difference between spirit and matter. No attachment to Krishna yet, but there is a detachment to matter. This is gyan. And that will lead, if you go complete that, to some meditation. And here, meditation on Paramatma, in essence, the Ashtanga Yoga process. And if one, for meditation, one will be able to fully renounce the fruits, this Nishkam Karma Yoga. Right? So back to 12.10. So this is a little bit of a progressive stage. So Prabhupada writes in the purport that there are two ways to reach Krishna. One is the gradual indirect development. with the renunciation of fruits, coming to knowledge, meditation, the super soul, ultimately to Bhagavan, right? Climbing those steps of the yoga ladder. But the direct process is to directly engage in sadhana bhakti. And that is the recommended path. The indirect path is good only if one cannot do bhakti. So Arjuna is being advised here to take the direct path. And why? Because it's safer. One is less likely to get distracted in the path. It is faster. One can immediately begin to relish the bliss of devotional service. It is more enjoyable. We've seen this in chapter 9, in the glorification of devotional service. It is a much better process. Right? So this is the section, and just to summarize the flow, in 12.8, in the 8th verse, Krishna is speaking about this perfected stage of devotional service, with attachment and affection, with love, and the result, you constantly living with Krishna without a doubt. In the 9th verse, Krishna said, well, if you cannot reach the perfected stage yet, do devotional service with the regular principles. Basically, Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. And the result is one will purify and awaken this dormant love and reach that perfected stage in verse 8. But then in 10 he says, if you cannot even do that, then do some direct work with the external senses for Krishna. Okay? Either Nishkam or Sakam Karma Yoga. And the result is one will purify and reach the perfected stage. But if you cannot do that, then at least sacrifice the results to some good cause. You will learn the process of sacrificing and hopefully ultimately come to the point of pure devotional service. So this is this section. And now, from verse 13 to the end of this chapter, Krishna is going to explain the very sweet and blissful qualities of the pure devotee who is very attractive to Krishna. Krishna is very, all attractive. He is the supreme all attractive. But these qualities of the pure devotees make them very dear to Krishna. So Krishna is going to explain some very, very wonderful and sweet qualities. And at the end of each verse, Krishna is going to say, and such a devotee is very dear to me. So if we want to learn how to become dear to Krishna, then we'll read these final 8 verses from chapter 20. They're very sweet, and we'll discuss those next week. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Jayananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki. Any questions or comments today on today's discussion, or any other discussion?
Hare Krishna Prabhu,
Hare Krishna.
just a comment Prabhu.
Yes.
I wanted this to go on Prabhu, this curtained down very fast.
Yeah.
I'm expecting more and looking at the book, I'm like, yes, I'm pretty sure we can do one more verse. I'm pretty sure we can do one more verse.
Yes.
Awesome class, Prabhu.
Hold that enthusiasm. We'll continue next week. This is a short section today.
Yeah.
A little bit of a reprieve before the big test. You can use the extra time for preparing and studying.
Very good. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Prabhuji, Hare Krishna, Dharma Pranam, all goes to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
I know, Prabhuji, you mentioned just before this 12:13 you started, this way of summarizing something, right, about the 12.8 to 12.
Yeah.
12. Can you just say that again, please? I couldn't really understand that.
Yeah. So the 8th verse again, Krishna spoke about the highest standard of bhakti, the perfected stage, which is remembering Krishna with full attachment and love. And that results in living with Krishna. But then in the next verse, he says, if you cannot do that yet, then practice the regular principles of bhakti, this Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. And one will purify and awaken this dormant love. One will reach that perfected stage. But if you cannot do that, then in the 10th verse he says, then use the external senses. So in 9 and 10, 8 and 9, one is using the mind to think of Krishna. And then says, well, then just work for Krishna. Do nishkam or sakam karma yoga. And again, the result is one will ultimately purify to reach the perfected stage. But if you cannot do that, and you cannot work directly for Krishna in yoga, then at least surrender the fruits of your work to some good cause, basically karma kanda. And the hope is that you'll slowly learn to purify and progress towards the higher stages. So these are the flow from 8 through 11. And then 12 kind of takes us back. Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Question online. Karma kanda and karma yoga are same?
No. So karma kanda, one performs some sacrifices for the goal of acquiring some material boon, some material benefit. So one has a desire to achieve, I'd like some money, so I'll do a sacrifice. A prescribed sacrifice from the Vedas, so I'm following the scriptures, but for some personal motive. Karma yoga is one is doing their work, they have some attachment to their work, but they're sacrificing the results to the Supreme, not for any personal motive, but simply understanding that this renunciation of the fruits will help purify me to a higher platform. So there is ultimately a goal of connecting with Krishna. So there is a transcendental objective. Whereas in Karma Kanda, the objective is material for one's own sense desire. So that is the distinction. And that's why Karma Kanda is not considered part of the yoga process, because there's not an objective to link with Krishna. So that is the difference. Hare Krishna, Dandavat.
Your explanation was so nice, neat. This 12th chapter is very tricky, but your explanation is so neat. No other question about it. I have some questions disturbing me a lot, so I want to ask something else than this.
No problem.
Yeah. So, this is with respect to relation between like a living entity and Krishna in the material world and in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, there is already a relation with Krishna with respect to a living entity. Example, I am a peacock of Krishna in the spiritual world. Okay, that is eternal. That will not change. Is that right, Prabhu?
Well, that is mostly right. So there is, now we're getting into very technical details, but the eternal rasa that one has with Krishna is considered to be eternal. This is the Nitya Siddha relationship we have with Krishna. But the caveat is that when one comes to the movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is bestowing a very special benediction that by following and coming under his shelter and mercy, one can experience the intensity of love in its highest intensity in this Madhurya Rasa. But ultimately, it'll still be up to one's desire, like one's, where they feel mostly situated, but that potential is there. So from an absolute technical perspective, actually one's eternal relationship can change by the mercy of Krishna himself through the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But otherwise, what we understand broadly, yes, one's relationship is eternal.
There is a possibility of changing the eternal relation, which is already existing relation with Krishna.
Yes. Yes.
So, basically, like right now we are in this materialist condition, like we are right now going in this process. Okay. So only by mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that relation can be changed. Otherwise, it remains same. Is that right?
Well, yes, but remember, in our conditioned state, that eternal relationship is covered. We do not see it. We do not perceive it. We don't even know what it is, but it's there. So back in the earlier days of our Guru Parampara, actually the Guru would reveal to the disciple what their eternal relationship is. But that practice was stopped, and Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur comments on this quite a bit, that practice was stopped because the irresponsible nature of, or the potential to be irresponsible with that information, I should say. Right? It's very difficult to hold that information. Right? Like Narottam Das Thakur in his service was revealed to him. Now there it was revealed directly, but he was one of the manjaris with the eternal service of boiling the milk for Champaklata Devi. Right? So that specific service was revealed to him. But again, that practice has been stopped to not confuse our mind. So our main focus is not to try to understand, what is my eternal? Just understand it is there, and try to practice our bhakti, our sadhana, so sincerely that we'll purify, and that soon will very quickly be revealed to us. We don't have to go and speculate and guess and all of that. It doesn't matter, right? And then that sort of secondary, not secondary I should say, but the additional feature, knowing that by the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one can awaken, this even most intensified rasa with Krishna.
So basically the relationship is still there. It's eternal.
It's there, yes. It is just covered. Just like the diamond in the mud. The diamond is still there, but you can't see it. But the diamond's there. That rasa is there. Actually, our Shastras explain that the soul we have, it has a shape actually.
Yeah.
And what is that shape? That shape is whatever the eternal form is we have in the spiritual world. But it has been compressed to become very, very small. But there's still some shape, form to it.
Yes. Thank you very much, Prabhu. If you don't mind, I have some different questions.
Yeah.
Disturbing me a little bit, so I want to ask.
Yeah, no problem. Well, 1 second. Let me just make sure. Any other questions on these verses from anyone? Okay, good. Oh yeah, 1 second. Kaushik Prabhu, yes.
Thanks, Prabhu. Dhanavad.
No problem.
Prabhuji, is giving charity to temple is one step above doing philosophical activities, or
Yeah,
how do we understand the
giving charity to the temple or donations to the temple is a direct service to Krishna. Right? So that is, because now I am working, so that is considered within the realm of devotional service. Depending on the mood, it can be in the higher realms of Nishkam Karma Yoga. But I would say, like in your case or our cases where we're sincerely trying to practice devotional service, it is within the realm of bhakti. When we give donations to the temple, because that is being used directly in the service of Krishna. Whereas if we give to, so let's just say some hospital or, some other good cause, it is being used not directly in the service of the Supreme. Make sense?
I think nice explanation.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so Arnari Prabhu, you want to ask your other questions?
Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna.
Actually, this is related to Pitraloka. I am disclaimer is I don't want to